What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be getting back to work on the new engine for our super cheap turbo Civic build. If you guys haven't been following along, this is a D16 Y8 that we found on Facebook Marketplace for $150. Once we got this thing home and tore it down, we found out that it had some spun rod bearings as well as a broken rod. So we got this thing completely stripped and we have already rebuilt a cylinder head for it. We went through and hand ported the Y8 head, threw a comp cam and some Crowler valve springs in it, and got that thing ready to go. So now it's time for us to turn our attention to the block. So in today's video, we're going to be prepping this thing and getting it filled with epoxy so that it can hold all the boost. We decided to go with the kit from eBay from BOYETTE. It's a really nice kit, but as you guys will see in today's video, it was my first time using it, so there were some mistakes made. So make sure that you guys learn from my mistakes. So let's get through the intro and jump right into today's video. So we're starting to get this thing prepped up and ready for epoxy. Now I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but down in here in the water jackets, for whatever reason, this block has a ton of corrosion in there. I think this was a very high mileage motor, but we cleaned it out best we could, and there's still a ton of corrosion. So I didn't want to go ahead and start working with epoxy and have an issue with it not wanting to bond to the walls. So what I did was I took a paintbrush like this, and I took some 100 grit sandpaper and just wrapped it around it best I could. So this is what I've been doing for a while now. Just have that sandpaper on the end of that paintbrush, trying to get this corrosion off. Now again, I'm not sure why this one's so bad. Maybe it's mileage or the coolant they used or whatever the case, but I didn't want to take a chance with the epoxy and then have it like not want to bond or seal or whatever the case might be. So I'm just going in here, getting the corrosion off best I can, and I'm not trying to take any material off of the block or the sleeves or anything like that. I'm just trying to get it to where the corrosion is off and maybe a light scuff on the surface itself. So I'm just going to keep working at this for a little while, and then I will show you guys what our first step in getting this block filled is. Alright guys, I think that's about as good as we're going to get it. I wish there wasn't corrosion there, but it is what it is. So we're going to go ahead, grab a vacuum, we'll get this all cleaned up, and then we can move on to what we need to do to set up for the epoxy. Now that we've got this thing all cleaned out, I went ahead and wiped off this mating surface with some acetone. Now we're going to take some blue painter's tape and cover this entire mating surface. Then we'll come back through with a razor blade and cut out just the water jackets so that everything else is covered. So let's get this thing taped up. Just gonna cover up anywhere that I'm worried about getting the epoxy on. Just gonna make sure it's pressed down nice and good. And if you press around where we're gonna be cutting, it'll help you see your outline. So. Alright, let's grab a nice fresh sharp razor blade and we'll start cutting this out. We've got our nice fresh new sharp razor blade here, and we're just gonna find a spot that we want to start. And start cutting out this water jacket. So I've noticed for me what works best is trying to keep the razor blade straight up and down, because if you lean, you'll notice over here where I just barely took too much tape off. You might not even be able to see it in camera, but I'll fix that here in a minute. But if you keep the razor blade straight up and down and pressed up against the wall of the water jacket, it makes the cut a lot smoother as far as like your tolerances go. Because we want to try to cover any metal surface that we don't want epoxy on the best we can. Came out decent. There's only like 1 or 2 spots right where I started that I want to fix, but once I got into a jam, came out pretty easy, pretty good. So just make sure that you have everything that you need covered before we move on. Now that we've got the block all taped off to a point that we're happy with, protecting any surface that we don't want to get epoxy on, we can move on to the next step. So for us, that next step would be blocking off any inlet or outlet going to this water jacket. So we're going to be using an old scrap water pump that we had laying around. I've already got it bolted onto the engine right here. And then on this D-series block, there's also a coolant crossover tube that goes along the back of the engine. So we've got that opening blocked off with some tape. Now since we have that done, we can move on to the next step, which would be filling this block with some sugar. Since this engine is going in our super cheap turbo Civic build, which is a street car, we still want to be able to run coolant or water through this engine to keep everything nice and cool and keep it streetable. So we're going to be using that sugar to build up a base at the bottom so that once we're done, we can rinse all the sugar out and there will be plenty of room for coolant to flow. But before we can start adding sugar to this block, we need to have it in a spot that's going to be maintaining above 60 degrees for the epoxy to dry. And we also need to get this block nice and level. Since it's wintertime here in the Northeast and there's actually snow on the ground, I don't want to heat the garage above 60 degrees all night long. So we're going to get this thing wheeled into our basement where we have a nice wood stove that'll keep this thing nice and warm and be perfect for this thing to cure. Now we're going to be filling a majority of the water jacket with sugar, only leaving ourselves about 5/8 of an inch from the deck surface for us to come through and put epoxy in. So let's get this thing rolled inside, we'll get the block all leveled off, and then we can finally start filling this thing up. So as you guys can see, we've got the engine and engine stand inside here on some cardboard. I used some little jacks we had to level this thing off, and then we just leveled it sideways by pivoting on the engine stand. So as you guys can see, I'm not sure if you can see that in the level, but it is level side to side, and then it is also level front to back. Again, not sure how good you can see that. But what we're going to do next is just take some sugar, start filling in the water jacket there. We're going to pour it into a Ziploc bag, cut the tip off, and then start pouring it into the water jacket until we're about 5/8 from the top. So let's go ahead and get this thing filled up with some sugar. We're going to find the corner of the bag and then use a pair of scissors and just cut the tip off so we can use it basically like a funnel. Just like that. Now we can start pouring it in the block. So I'm going to start off with a funnel with the sugar just to not make a mess. Now as the sugar starts to settle, we're gonna grab a flat blade screwdriver and just go through here and just kind of knock it down and make it level all the way around the water jacket. We're looking to leave 5/8 of an inch between the sugar and the deck surface. So I'm gonna use this flat blade screwdriver and just go through here and level it off. now we can open up our epoxy kit. So we went with the crisp BOYETTE one off of eBay, and it just comes with 2 simple pieces here. We've got our hardener in this little bottle, which isn't gonna be full, so don't freak out. And then just this metal can, which has the epoxy in it. So we're gonna mix this stuff up in a 1-gallon Ziploc bag. We'll mix it, it'll change color. I'll show you guys here in a second. But once it changes color, then we can start adding it to the block. We're gonna go in layers. So we're gonna add a little bit, let it settle a minute, add some more, and just keep working that way until we are fully built up. So, like I said, we're gonna mix it in a Ziploc bag. I've got a couple different ways that I might try pouring it into the block. I'm gonna try it with the bag, and then if that's not working so well, we'll use like a plastic cup or like a plastic water bottle. So we're gonna go ahead and get this stuff mixed up, and then we'll give it a shot. Stuff kind of looks like peanut butter, to be honest. Just gonna let it empty out into this bag. I'll grab a scraper. We'll scrape out the rest of the can, and then we can mix in the hardener. This is what the hardener looks like. This is what the peanut butter looks like in the bag. Go ahead and open up the hardener. We're gonna dump this whole little bottle in with our epoxy. Go ahead and zip up our bag. I'm gonna try to keep it at the bottom as best as I can. You can see it's already starting to turn that nice cool blue color. It's actually a pretty sick color, not gonna lie. Alright guys, so as you can see, all of this has changed color now. So I'm gonna go ahead, make a little cut at the tip of our bag again, and I'm gonna try pouring it that way. If it doesn't work, we will go to like a plastic or paper cup. Alright guys, we've got it in this water bottle, and I've just got it pinched, and we're gonna use that as a little spout, and we're just gonna pour some in all the way around as we go. It actually works really good this way. I just cut the end off a plastic water bottle and started pouring it. Now we want to build this up in stages, and it would be ideal to tap it with like a rubber mallet or something, but ours is on an engine stand and it can turn. So I'm going to tap it a little bit, but I'm also going to be very careful about tapping it because we'll have to keep re-leveling it. So for now, I won't worry about it, and we'll just verify that we're level once we're done. So I'm just going to tap it lightly for now. I also want to be careful how slow I go here because it is really hot in here. So this stuff is going to want to cure decently fast. So we'll go ahead, pour another layer on. Like I said, once we get closer to the top and we're going to let this thing sit, then I'll re-level it and make sure we're good to go. But until we get way up there, I'm not too worried about that part. I'm gonna check level real quick. All right. Go ahead and top this thing off one last time here, and I think we're just about done. I don't want to go too high because if it's higher than our mating surface, we're going to be in big trouble. So I'm just going to go ahead and add just a little bit more. Check level again, and then we'll let it sit. All right, guys, so as you can see, we got this thing epoxied. We're going to let it sit for about a half an hour, and then we'll pull all the tape off. You can notice right there towards the end, I started making a mess, and I just started like stressing out about how long it was taking. I was afraid this stuff was going to start to thicken up before I could get it all laid in there. But if I were to do it again, there are a few things that I would do differently. I wouldn't take as many layers. In the instructions it said to do layers. I think I would work a little bit faster if I were to do it all over again. And then as far as the air bubbles and things like that, be careful how much you tap it, or tap it before you put epoxy in to let all of the sugar settle. Because I think what happened to us was we didn't tap it with just sugar in there, and when we started tapping it with the epoxy, I think some of the sugar settled, and I think it actually caused us to be a little bit lower than I wanted with the epoxy. But I'm not going to worry about it too much. I think it's going to work perfectly fine for what we're doing. So let's let this thing cure for about half an hour and we'll pull the tape off. So it's been about half an hour. We're going to go ahead and pull the tape off. But before we do, I want you guys to learn from my mistakes. So I followed the directions where it said to tap it with a mallet to get air bubbles and stuff out, but I didn't think about it. I should have tapped it with just sugar in there first, like before we started adding epoxy, because I think what happened was I tapped it with the mallet and I think some of the sugar settled over here, and now we have a little bit of a low point right there. I mean, it's hard to tell unless you're really looking at it, but when you start looking close, you can tell that there is a low spot right about here, right about where the water pump inlet would be. So I think that's what happened. I think I tapped it, a little bit of sugar settled a little bit more. I tried packing sugar in there best I could, but note for next time, or for you guys doing it, definitely fill it with sugar, tap this thing a whole bunch, make sure that the sugar settles everywhere that it's gonna settle, and then start working with epoxy. So not much I can do about it now. I was gonna try to just keep filling it, but the epoxy started to thicken up and I didn't know how long I could get away with just keep topping it off here. I don't think that there's any epoxy going all the way down into the water pump. There was plenty of sugar there to keep it above that. I just think it's gonna be a little bit low here. I'm hoping that maybe this will all settle and then it'll all just be a little bit low, but it is what it is. So let's go ahead and pull the tape off this thing. So there it is, guys. We got this thing uncovered. It actually looks pretty sweet. I really actually like the color, but other than that, it looks really good. I'm happy with how it turned out. Like I said, we do have the one low spot over there, but that's something that was my fault, no fault of the kit. Should say to tap it with sugar, but that was my own dumb mistake. I should have thought about that a little bit more. But either way, it looks pretty good. It's going to be better than having no epoxy in there. So we'll let this stuff cure all the way. Probably let it go overnight into tomorrow. And then when we get a chance, we'll mark it with a head gasket and drill some coolant holes. All right, guys, so it is the next day. We've got the block out here in the garage again. And I'm going to show you guys something that I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't show you. So we made a mistake last night. As you guys seen, I was tapping the block to get the air bubbles out of the epoxy. Now, any normal person would say, common sense says, the direction says to tap the block to get air pockets out of the epoxy. Well, I should have tapped the block when it was just sugar in there before I leveled everything off, just to make sure that the sugar settled in all of the places that it should settle. Well, I didn't, so this is 100% on me. It was a dumb mistake. I'm an idiot. But I didn't tap the block with just sugar in it. So once we put the epoxy in and I started tapping the block to settle the air bubbles out of the epoxy, I'm sure the sugar settled and we got ourselves a low spot. So as you guys can see right here, it's pretty low. I seen that last night and I was like, not a big deal. It is what it is. It's still got to be better than not having epoxy in there. Well, where the big problem comes in is where that epoxy went when it settled. So as you guys can see, we have epoxy all through the water pump and water system. So that's going to be a big problem. Once again, this is 100% on me. I'm an idiot. I should have thought about that. That's just common sense. I should have tapped it to settle all the sugar in. I don't know why I didn't. I was just in a rush trying to film this thing and I made a mistake. So we can try to clear that out, try to chip it out, Dremel it out, whatever we need to do to get that opened out. Now, what I would recommend to you guys so that you don't make my same mistake is either A, obviously beat the crap out of the block with just sugar in it so it all settles and finds where it's gonna go. before you level it all off and add the epoxy, or just don't use a water pump. I was just thinking, well, it's easier than taping it off. I have a scrap water pump that I can throw on there. I didn't care if sugar got in it. I was like, not a big deal. So I threw that water pump in there, and that was a big mistake, because I feel like if I would have just taped it off or used foil like it says in the directions, that all of the sugar would have just naturally settled on its own. I would still recommend tapping the block, but obviously I didn't do those things, and we are here now, so we need to figure something out. Let's start trying to get this thing apart, see if we can't fix our mistake and salvage this block. What is up, guys? I wanted to let you know that we are now working with MaXpeedingRods to get you guys a discount at checkout. So whether you need connecting rods, coilovers, or a new turbocharger, make sure to check them out and use our code capital B2B, and that will save you 10% at checkout. Let's get back to today's video. So the first thing we're going to do to try to fix our oops here is take this water pump off, see if it will come off, we'll tap it off, and then see what we're working with behind there. Alright, I got a hammer for that. Ooh, yeah, that's promising. Yeah, as you guys can see, it settled right into the water pump, which sucks, because now it's all over this. But we're going to try to chip it out the best we can. Luckily, this is a water system. If this happened in an oil system for whatever reason, it'd be a completely different story. But since this is the water system, there's some things that I'm willing to live with if we have to. So let's grab a screwdriver or a chisel or something, and we'll just start trying to knock that stuff out of there. Carefully try to chisel some of this out, try to break some of it off. Yeah, I was just curious, I didn't know if it would.
Go right in the middle of it, boom.
Oof. Let me grab a wheel. Oh, there goes a piece. Oh, got it.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Whole piece broke loose. Still in there, but it broke loose. Got it. Yeah. Interesting. I've got my little mini Dremel with a 320 grit sandpaper wheel on it, and I'm just working on getting this cleaned up. We've got this pretty well good right here. Now I'm just going to work on this, and then maybe clean up this outlet inlet just a tiny bit, and I think we might just have it. So let's get back to work here and see if we can't get this thing good to go. So as you guys seen, we were working with a Dremel and a chisel, and we've got all of that epoxy out of there. I cleaned up this inlet or outlet right there pretty good, and we cleaned up where the water pump goes. You can't feel any of it. You can see a little bit of it where I was working with it, but it cleaned up really good. And then you can see back here where the coolant tube goes. We got all that cleaned up as well. So I'm pretty confident to say that crisis is averted. That was 100% my mess up, so learn from my screw ups. Make sure that you either use tape here or beat the crap out of the block with that rubber mallet before you put the epoxy in, because that could have been really bad. I thought this was going to be a throwaway block last night, but luckily some patience and a little bit of time, we got this thing cleaned up and good to go. So the next thing that we're going to do is take our new head gasket here. We have a Cometic. If you have an old head gasket, that's what you should probably use, but I threw mine out when I took this block apart. So we're going to use our new head gasket. We'll lay it on here. I do have a couple dowel pins that we can throw in it just to make sure this thing's perfectly lined up. Then we'll mark it with a Sharpie, get a 1/8 inch drill bit, and we will drill some holes. So let's go ahead and get that thing opened up, lined out, and make our marks. So we're going to be careful with this thing since it is our new head gasket. Like I said, I'd recommend using an old one, but I don't think I saved it. I think I threw it out. So go ahead and use this new one. So we're just going to want to make sure we get that lined up where it goes. I do have the dowel pins real quick. I'm just going to throw them in there just because. Now, as you guys can see, there's some spots that have bigger holes than others, and then there's obviously some that are pretty small. So we're going to mark all of them, and I think for these really big ones, what we'll do is one hole on one side, one hole on the other side. And then just do it at our discretion. I don't want to put them too close together or multiple holes too close, because I don't want to defeat the whole purpose of this. So we'll just make sure that we've got this thing pretty well flat here. Mark some holes. So for these medium ones, I think we're just gonna do one hole in the center. On this big one here, I think we're gonna do two. We'll do one on each like corner kind of deal. Something like that. And that. And we'll just do centers on these as well. All right, I think we got them all. We can pop this thing back off. Like I said, for these bigger ones here, use your discretion, whatever you think, but we just did one in each of the middles, and then obviously we have that bad spot from my mistake I made, and we're just gonna move those kind of outwards, just away from it just a little bit. And then this one centered, this one we doubled up, centered, and then just all the normal ones we centered. So we can go ahead, pop this back off, put it back in its package, keep it nice and safe. Get a 1/8 inch drill bit out and we can start drilling. Now that we've got all the holes marked that we need to drill out, I decided to level off our block once again, and I did that just to make it a little bit easier for us while we're drilling. Now all I need to focus on is keeping our drill nice and straight and level. It's not super important that they're perfectly straight. Obviously the straighter that we can get them, the better. But what is super important is that we don't touch either wall with our drill bit. If we go through the epoxy and touch the wall while we're drilling, we pretty much make this whole process useless. So once again, be very careful when we're drilling these things not to touch either wall. We're going to be using a DeWalt 1/8 inch drill bit, which we have right here. I'll link one in the description below. We picked up a little 2-pack. But now that we're all set up, let's pop some holes in this thing. So like I said, guys, the most important part is to make sure that we don't touch the walls. So I'm going to go ahead and get this guy centered up here. And they don't need to be 100% perfectly straight, but as straight as we can get them, the better. So let's go ahead and get this guy set up here. And I just keep a decently even pressure on it. Try to keep this thing as straight as possible. I'm not sure how this stuff is going to react to our drill bit, so for the first few I'm just going to be cleaning it off as we go so we don't burn up a drill bit real fast. So that you guys can see and I can see what I'm doing. So far we seem to be really good. Let's just keep on going with it. Alright, so we made it through. Go ahead and clean that up real quick. Now that we've got the first one done, I'm just going to keep working my way all the way around this block. You don't have to be as precise as I am cleaning it constantly because we're going to be washing this thing anyways. I was just keeping an eye on our progress, making sure we're straight and that everything is going to plan. So let's go ahead and get the rest of these done. So I have noticed with this stuff that it likes when you drill at like a medium-ish pace. It doesn't seem to like wide open, and it also doesn't seem to like slow. Metals are like that too. Sometimes different speeds will work better for you. Here I've noticed a like medium high-ish speed works pretty well for drilling this stuff. Alright guys, so now that we've got pretty much everything drilled except for these last 6 holes that go between the 2 cylinders, I've really been thinking about those a lot, if I even want to drill those, because they're between the 2 cylinders and I know there's a little step down right there and I really just don't want to hit it. So I'm kind of worried about doing that. So what I think I'm gonna do to try to find the best of both worlds is we're gonna step down a little bit in drill bit size, and I'm actually gonna come out away from that a little bit just so that I know I'm not gonna hit that little step down. There is gonna be gap between the gasket and the head and the block for this to fill up with coolant, and then I think it'll find the holes going into the gasket and the head on its own. So I'm not too worried about that part of it. So I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and drill these, and I'll just drill them a little bit smaller and a little bit further out than what the gasket shows. So let's get this bit on the drill and we'll try it out. Alright guys, so we've got this thing pretty much all drilled out. I'm happy with it. Like I said, I just went a little bit smaller on these ones and bumped them out a little bit more, but it's going to be perfectly fine. I think even if I didn't do those, we would have had plenty of coolant flow, but I wanted to go ahead and do it just because. So there you have it guys. Filling your block with epoxy really isn't that hard. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this was the first time I had ever done it, so there were some mistakes made, so I wanted to highlight those so that you guys can hopefully avoid making the same issues. Now there are a few things that I would do differently looking back at this. I probably wouldn't have used the water pump even though I had a scrap one laying around. I would have either taped off that area or covered it up with some foil just to avoid the issues that I had. And I would also have gone through with a rubber mallet or a dead blow hammer and pretty much beat the crap out of the block to get all of the sugar to settle into those tight little places so that we could avoid any epoxy dropping down in there once we pour the epoxy in. But all in all, I'm actually really happy with how this thing turned out. Once again, for being my first time, I'm super happy with it. It looks sweet, and I think it's gonna hold up to as much boost as we wanna throw at this thing. The next limiting factor, I believe, is gonna be our Vitara pistons. So I'm gonna keep an eye out. If I can find a nice budget set on Facebook Marketplace that someone bought and doesn't need, or even if they're very lightly used, I might scoop them up because I think this block can handle it now. But hopefully you guys could learn from my mistakes so that your block comes out that much nicer. As always, I appreciate you guys for checking out the channel. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell, and check us out on all of our other social media platforms, Facebook, TikTok, and Bought to Build Official on Instagram. And we will catch you on the next one.
Oh.